This week on A Lively Experiment, we continue to sift through what the General Assembly did and didn't do in 2024. And voters in November will decide whether Rhode Island should hold a constitutional convention next year.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by...
Hi, I'm John Hazenwhite Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.
Joining us on the panel, Weayonnoh Nelson-Davies, Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute, attorney and former State Representative Mike Marcello, and Providence Journal State House reporter Patrick Anderson. Welcome to this week's Lively Experiment. I'm Jim Hummel. It has been a week since the House Speaker and Senate President hit the gavel after one last marathon night to close out the 2024 General Assembly session. Now our attention turns to the elections in November. We will get to those a little later. But first, highlights of what happened since lawmakers first convened in January. Patrick, as usual, you had the front row seat this year. And we're beginning to sift out in the week what's happened. Anything surprise you in the moment while it was going on?
No, we were a little surprised when the Citizens Bank tax came back. It looked like it was dead, and then it rose right towards the end. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised considering how much pull Citizens has in the state and how much this meant to them that it would come back. We were surprised just about the amount that was spent in the budget for the whole year, and that then they could give more money to citizens and really find a lot of money in the cushions and in the cracks of the couch for all kinds of things. But that was probably the biggest surprise, and kind of looking ahead to see how they afford that going forward.
The final budget, though, was almost $250 million more than what the governor had proposed. Now, I know some of that's one-time spending, some of that's surplus, but did you expect maybe some more to be put away? Because they're already talking about a structural deficit for next year.
No, didn't expect more to be put away. That's not really...
Whether it would be prudent and whether you expected it are two different questions, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just have been making... They have been saying yes a lot to a lot of things, and it's been some of the least rancorous debates about spending and really about legislation at the end of the General Assembly that I can remember in quite a while. And I think a lot of that is just having that extra money, both from the federal government and just, inflation is kind of helping boost those numbers. The tax revenue keeps coming in better than they expected year to year. So they always have a little more money than the governor thought they'd have when they start. And that's just has made it easier.
I think the day of reckoning will probably be next budget year.
A different day of reckoning.
Different day of reckoning. I also believe that the Citizens Bank bill, though it was a surprise, I think there was an effort to put it into the budget. But I think that you need 50 votes to pass the budget, and I think the Speaker was concerned that he wouldn't have 50 votes.
Do you think that also got conflated with the land purchase deal in Riverside? Because they wanted to... Do you think there was a little bit of...
A little bit, but I know that the East Providence delegation was obviously against that because it was going to lose... We were going to lose revenue, tax revenue in East Providence. But I think that once it was taken out of the budget, I think it was a surprise that they put it back so quickly, because I think the concern was, that they really didn't have enough time to study it and to figure out what was really going on. But I definitely knew they weren't going to put it in the budget because they needed those 50 votes, and I think they were going to peel away some progressives if that was in the budget, who were against the special deal for citizens, as they call it.
Busy couple of months for you up there. What were you looking at?
Oh, a lot of things, and we definitely look at the budget, and it is a large budget. We always push for raising revenue, but there was some investment made to address poverty, to deal with child care issues. So Rhode Island Works, the Child Assistance and Workforce Development Program, was not in the governor's budget, was put in by the General Assembly that will increase Rhode Island Works for about 5,000 children in the state of Rhode Island. So that was a good investment, we thought.
And had you planted the seed? I'm always interested to see how the sausage is made, because a lot of what the extra $250 million were for things like that. So you kind of want to know, where is this money going? So the governor didn't include it originally. You had asked for it, and then what? A lot of talking, lobbying, talking to people in the following months, right?
Yeah, so meeting with the Speaker, meeting with the House Finance Committee, and basically allowing them to understand that that program is funded by the Temporary Assistance for Needy Family Block Grant. So we get money from the federal government to fund that. And we actually had a reserve of almost $100 million sitting down for years that wasn't being used. So we really pushed hard and saying, we have the money, we have it in reserve, you have to invest in this program. And I think that landed well with the speaker.
And what practically is that going to do? What does
so
that
what it will do, so for a family of 3, at this point, they were making about $721 a month. Now this 20% increase will get them to about $865 a month. So it's a good investment. However, it's still at 40% of the federal poverty level. And according to the federal government, under 50% is deep poverty. So even though we've made some investment, because in 2021, when we made the first investment for the first time, we got it to 40%. We didn't protect for inflation, so we're back to 40%. So we're really, one of the things we were pushing for was to get us to 50%, so families are not living in deep poverty, and to make sure we protect our investment by instating a COLA, and we didn't do so this year.
Mike, what else were you looking at in the session?
I think the Leopold bill was a big bill that finally came out. Very interesting reform there.
And they got pretty much everything. I mean, the expanded panel,
The expanded panel is
expanded
big.
penalties, 5 or 14 days, and then the chiefs being able to speak about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been up there since I've been there. I was surprised to see it, hit the floor that quickly, this year. But there seemed to be an agreement between both chambers. Last year, there was an agreement. The expanded panel is good. The new thing that I like about the bill is that the police officers used to be one picked by the accused officer, one picked by the department. Now the 3 officers who are on the panel were going to be randomly picked once they put in a name.
And the panel expanded.
And the panel expanded. So you're not going to have, basically the neutral used to make the decision really because each side was picking.
The not so neutral sometimes.
So,
right?
So that's going to be very interesting. So we'll see how it works out. I think we have, I think it doesn't take effect till January 1st. So there'll be a whole, the working in and figure out how you get on the list and what judges, going to be eligible and those kind of things. So that was a big lift for law enforcement, I think, and for cities and towns, frankly.
And then right at the end, the big question was would they keep the provision that would have potentially allowed body camera footage of non-charged felony incidents involving police officers from being withheld? And I never quite figured out whether that was something that was put into the bill, the original bill before it was changed, that the police unions really wanted, and whether that was a big deal for them. I think that would have been would have made it very difficult to get body camera footage of a lot of incidents.
It's
and could have gone
counterproductive
further. It could have gone. Yeah, it could have put in something in Leobor that's stronger in the reform bill that meant to reform Leobor than it ever was before. But then that got taken out. So
yeah, I think the Senate gets credit for that. They caught it and they made a change and they sent it back to the House to make sure that was not put in there. So yeah, kept
I think
in there.
the transparency issue too, because so many times the chief just say, "I can't talk about this," and that immediately kind of raises your suspicion, particularly when police are involved. And so the reforms, I think, any thought about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that was highlighted for us was General Assembly members stepping up and actually saying we have a concern about certain things. And some of them were nervous about doing that. So we always look about when can General Assembly members step up. One of the things we were happy about, which was a nice surprise this year, was the Secure Choice Retirement Program. And that was pretty new. We've been fighting for it for a few years, along with ARP, to allow about 172,000 employees in private sector who do not have access to retirement funds to get retirement. And the speaker put that in. And there was a lot of debate behind the scene whether it was a good investment. We think it is. So that's good for small businesses who can afford that retirement program, as well as for employees who never had access to that. So that was something we were really surprised and excited to see.
One of the things that didn't get touched, which is actually a good thing, there was a concern about tinkering with the educational funding formula, and they didn't really touch that, and that would open up. There was an effort to open that up to make some adjustments. That didn't really happen. They did put more money into the educational budget, which obviously the cities and towns like. But that was a good lift for the cities and towns. So that was I think the House gets credit for that, putting more money than the governor had proposed for education funding for the cities and towns.
Hasn't that usually been the case though? At the end, by the time the House budget comes out, they want to give the cities and towns a little bit more.
Absolutely. Whenever there's more,
it's a popular
money, yeah, and especially the funding formula is something they never want to be seen as cutting. The General Assembly has, especially in recent years, always protected that. And if they have extra money to make that whole, they're definitely going to do it. I think we expected that to happen. Whether how much the governor was proposing that cut just to make his numbers work, or he really wanted to tinker with that, I'm not certain. Nothing really significant with charter schools passed, so that's kind of status quo. The secure choice, that's a victory for the general treasurer. He was pushing for that, so that's something for him in this session that he can run on. So yeah, mostly, not a lot of people are angry coming out of this the end of this session in this.
Yeah, it's hard not to be with a $14 billion budget. The one thing that kind of flew under the radar for most of the session, but really was highlighted at the end, was the state retirees, summer state retirees. You were there when they passed the pension reform.
3 times, yep.
Right. So, I mean, you were right in the middle of those debates, and we need to save the pension system. What do you think now, with 10 years perspective on that, restoring some of it?
I think no one anticipated the inflation, and that was probably probably one of the big issues. And what people don't realize is many teachers did not contribute to Social Security, so that was their only source of retirement income. And because of inflation, if they're stuck with no COLA, they're really going backwards in their retirement. I was surprised. They drew the line, I think, at anybody who was retired before 2012, I think, would get a COLA restored. There's still going to be a lot of pushback every year to try to get that fully restored. Sometimes it can be a dangerous thing because, the money is really not there yet. So every time they put more money into pensions, they've got to cut it from other programs that they want to do. So there's going to be continued pressure, no question about it. And I think they're going to have to do something eventually about the COLA. But they lowered the threshold, I think, from 80% to 75% when the COLA would kick in for some retirees. So again, that's probably not likely to happen during some of these people's lifetimes. So it's an issue, but I don't think a lot of people actually want to deal with it because it's a very contentious issue, because the more money you put to pensions, the less money you have for these other programs.
And it's a complicated formula, isn't it? I know, Kathy,
yes.
you wrote about it. That I'm not sure any 2 people in the world know what it is, and they are unsure that it's indexed, and so they're not quite sure. But I think the retirees, and these are people before 2012. Again, some of them don't have Social Security. That they're really. You hear of all the pension abuses in these. The Providence firefighter making $200,000. Most of these people are pulling in $35,000, $40,000, and that's all they have. But it'll be indexed going forward, right?
Yeah, this was more for the retirees that I think most people expected they would get. But then the question, but they do want more. It's not everything they wanted, even close. So then the question is what was provided this year something that will satisfy them in the years when the budget gets tougher, or is this giving them the signal of, no, we should and can ask for more and get full restoration and everything we got. I'm not certain exactly how that plays in the years out.
Go ahead.
I know I'm saying a lot of people who voted for the pension reform are no longer there, but when we were there, after we passed it, there was a pretty much unwritten rule where we weren't going to put in any bills or anything to kind of change it. Like, we took a hard vote, and we were just going to let it play out for 10 years. And I guess
time.
Time.
The one final thing before we move on, paid family leave. I know that was a big deal for you guys. So explain. It's 6 weeks. You wanted 12, and it's one of those you didn't get everything that you wanted.
We did not get everything we wanted, but we did get 8. So we had asked for 12. We were at 6. Got from 4 to 6 in the last couple of years, and now we're going to get to 8, starting with 7 weeks next year, and then 8 in 2026. And we're also able to get a little bit of increased independence allowance. So that was a good start. But if we're pushing for being competitive with Massachusetts, we're failing a little bit with 8 weeks because Massachusetts, Connecticut are at 12 weeks at this point. So we're happy for the increase, and we got to the table with the business community, had conversations, compromised, like the General Assembly like us do. But we think 12 weeks is where we need to be competitive with other states and to really answer the call that families and employees need.
We were exchanging emails before, and Weayonnoh said, do we want to be like Massachusetts or do we not? We want to be competitive with the citizens' tax. Right. We want it with education, but when it comes to payday lending, another one, and family leave, a little bit of a disconnect. And the payday lending went down again.
It did. And that was disappointing.
It seemed like this year was.
Oh yeah, we give it all this year. And probably got into a little bit of
How
trouble
many
doing that.
discussions did you have
That's
about
been around
payday
a lot.
lending?
You know, the interesting about payday lending, it's not only the payday lenders, but one of the quiet lobbies about this are the people who own the strip malls where these payday lenders are. And
Cash
they're,
advance.
and they're, you know, they're landlords, and they have a presence up there, and that's where most of these payday lenders are, these little strip malls. And so the people who own those buildings are like, no, these are good tenants, and they pay our rent, and we don't want to have to chase them.
Especially now, because the commercial real estate market is tanked, and there's
point.
no one to move into those
Bill Murphy
spaces.
still represents them, right?
I believe
Payday
so.
lending,
yes.
yeah.
Enough said. That's all you need to know.
But we did, you know, I will say, you know, we built a lot of momentum. We had a public letter, the governor, attorney general, all 5 state officials signed on to it. And as well, we moved the needle with some city audiences, you know. So we look at the General Assembly, we knew it was going to be a tough call, and we decided to implement some other strategies. So we're going to keep pushing for payday lending reform in Rhode Island.
I think it's worth saying, though, this is, I think, the second budget or the third budget. There's been no increase in broad-based taxes, no increase in fees. Maybe it's because of some of the federal money, but I got to give the speaker and
the revenue's
president.
been up.
The revenue's been up. So it's been that's a good feat because there's a pressure for the billionaires tax and those kind of things, and that has not happened.
Like Massachusetts.
Right.
Right? You don't do that either.
Yeah.
All right. Voters this fall are going to be deciding whether they want to have a constitutional convention. We haven't had one for 40 years. What does that mean? Let's go to our former legislator, lawyer, and somebody who studies this. You've been really interested in this. And so it passed, the bill passed, put it on the ballot in November. And if it passes, then you would convene one next year.
If the voters approve it, correct. It's either this year or next year. I don't think they've actually decided on the timeline. But I think it's, again, been 40 years since we've had a constitutional convention. I know some of my colleagues, former colleagues, don't want the idea because they're afraid it's going to open it up to everything. But
God forbid you'd have line item veto.
Well,
right,
I looked at what was filed this year. So there were bills filed for constitutional amendments for 4-year terms for state senators and reps. There was a right to education amendment. There were term limits proposed. There was a constitutional amendment which would allow juries to nullify criminal convictions, jury for nullification, and to limit the right to vote to just citizens of Rhode Island only. Those are all constitutional reforms that were put in this year that didn't go anywhere. But there are other issues like the line item veto, ethics reform, open government records, those kind of things that could be put into. So I think it's a good time. It's been 40 years. Look how technology has changed in 40 years. I support it. I would hope that there's a commission that has also been appointed with the joint resolution. I hope they get that up and running to kind of focus on some of these issues. And at the end of the day, it's the voters who are going to decide whether they, approve these amendments or not. But I think it's a good time to allow the people whose government this is to amend their constitution or at least study the amendments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anytime the people can have a voice into something, I'm for it. I think the concern with the Constitutional Convention is whether the will of the people will really come through with something like that, or whether a special interest group will overshadow the process. And, these amendments are amendments that people will love, but the scope is also a concern. Anything could go through the Constitutional Convention. There are concerns about abortion rights, there are concerns about civil rights, and concerns about who will really be a part of this. And so I think those are the reasons Rhode Islanders have rejected it in the last 3 years. But I think it makes me excited to think about, can voters have a voice in our electoral process? But that's concerns about the scope and who will really be leading the
and I
charge.
think just to suggest that there's no outside influence in the General Assembly now is just, there is outside influence.
Definitely.
So it means because of outside influences, you're not getting some of these things that, the 4-year term, the term limits and those kind of type of things. So it's just changing one political form for another. So, but this will, I'm hoping that the voters do approve it, and I think it would be refreshing to see Rhode Islanders take a hard look at the structure of their government.
To me, the big thing is, if there is a constitutional convention, do they go for something that allows voter referendums? Because in other states, you have all kinds of issues, every election cycle determined by referendum, and here we don't. And that's a big difference. In a lot of states, that's set the structure of a lot, like California with property taxes. And in Massachusetts, they have them. All kinds of things can come up on voter referendums.
That was Prop 2.5 all those years ago, right?
Right. And here, the legislature has total control, which is why they don't want a constitutional convention. They say, we're doing a good job, thank you very much. We'll keep doing what we're doing. But if it goes to direct democracy, that can open up the window for all kinds of different things that never see the light of day under the current system. So that's kind of the big one without getting into a specific issue, that's a structural change that could allow other issues to happen.
And that was the concern 40 years ago. You talked about abortion rights. It was a little bit more conservative, I think, than mainstream Rhode Island. But as Mike, you and I were talking in the green room, you get two bites at the apple here. The Constitutional Convention can recommend all these things, but then the voters have to vote on them.
Correct.
So I understand special interest groups, advertising and whatever. I think they voted down the abortion one, and I think actually you would find it that voters would probably, in Rhode Island anyway, probably codify or vote against anything to mess with the abortion rights.
I think voters today would probably enshrine in the Constitution a right to abortion today. But again, it's the voters' choice to have that happen. Direct referendum is certainly an interesting issue, perhaps. Inspector General, which seems to have languished all these years in the General Assembly. So it's a good check to have this, to have the people actually convene and let them look at it. And again, there will be special interests. There's special interests in the General Assembly today. So again, I don't think it. I think that the fear that people like the ACLU likes to see, this is going to open up to a runaway convention. I think it's overstated, and I think it's high time that the voters have an opportunity to do so.
My
Run
recollection
for delegate if there is a convention.
Bob Walsh already said he would. He was sitting in your seat last week. I do think. I think what happened, my recollection was from 10 years ago that there was a tremendous ad campaign. I mean, the lobbyists came out to lobby against having it. So we'll see where the advertising money comes. Let's do this quickly before we go to outrages. Patrick, we look to the elections in the fall, and the filing deadline will be next week. Rhode Island's got this weird thing that you can only file on 3 days. It's not a longer period. So we'll know by the end of Wednesday next week. We'll talk about it Friday, who's going to run, who's not. Now, no general officers this year, so we kind of turn to the General Assembly, some of the local offices. What are you hearing? We know that Senator Miller's not going to run again. He's probably the highest profile guy, right?
Who has stepped down or said he's not going to run
again.
We are watching the Senate closely because of the Senate leadership picture, because the Senate president is battling cancer. He was not presiding over most of the session that just passed. And so exactly what his influence over what was passed and what his influence is right now is a little bit of a question mark. This past week, we just had the Senate president announce he's running again, and then a stream of press releases and social media posts and letters from lawmakers, party officials, all kinds of insiders hailing his decision to run again and wishing him best of luck, which was a little bit conspicuous in how they did it. That's not usually usually if you hear that one of the most powerful people in the General Assembly is running again, that's expected. You're not hearing a lot of like, the speaker's running again, because everyone expects. So it's almost they're being a little conspicuous in how much they are pointing it to the fact that he's running again. But everyone is watching him, and to see not just if he runs, but eventually what the succession plan might be in his mind and others in the Senate.
Not only the General Assembly, but we were also talking off camera, it's tough to get people to run these days. And the Republicans particularly have, the question always is what percentage of the seats are going to go unchallenged. But even on the local level.
Yeah, and people are just not interested in running for school
committee.
Why do you
think that is?
I think social media has a lot to do with it. People just don't want to be, fodder for the Facebook warriors that I call them.
My wife calls it Facebook foolishness.
Yeah. I do think it needs to be looked at. I think the campaign finance laws sometimes discourage people from running because they fill out all this paperwork. You're running for school committee, for town council. You're spending like $3,000, $4,000. It's not a lot of money, but you got to file all this paperwork. And a lot of people just don't want to do it for that reason. And I think it's just apathy in general. This is not a good time for politics where, we got so divided. Like we've got the Democrats and the Republicans, and they just can't seem to work together, and truth doesn't matter, and facts don't matter, and it's just a very, very contentious time. This is the exact time where we need good people to run for public office.
Yeah, I would love to see, especially with the General Assembly, I would love to see more grassroots community leaders run, people who have lived experiences run to really deal with issues for low and modest income Rhode Islanders in the state of Rhode Island. But it is challenging. It's a part-time legislation. Most of those people cannot afford the $17,000 a month and, sort of cut their job at 3 p.m. to go and be there. So we need some incentive to get other people to run. And I love election year because it's a time to challenge, our leaders and say, are you really, representing the people's interests? And if you're not, leave. But we need people to run to do that.
I always said when I was up there, it wasn't very popular, that you become a better rep if you have a challenger every election. And I think that's true.
And we don't know how many, on the last couple of years, challenges from the left have been sort of the defining feature of a lot of the General Assembly elections. And there might not be, we don't know, but there might not be as many this year. We don't have the we don't know if the political cooperative is going to run a slate of candidates. And that could have a different feel to those elections without that.
Let's do outrages and/or kudos. Mr. Marcello, we'll begin with you.
So I'm going to go to the state of Louisiana, who just passed a law demanding that the Ten Commandments be put in every public school classroom, even though the Supreme Court has ruled decades ago that they couldn't do that. And I looked at the rankings of Louisiana and the educational system, and they're 49th in the country. So I think they should be spending the money on putting it into education, and then they're going to fight money with lawyers.
Is the ink dry yet on the ACLU lawsuit?
It's just going to be a waste of money. They know what the law is. I don't know if they're hoping that the Supreme Court maybe will revisit the issue, but it's settled law. It appeared to be settled law, and all that money, I just think that all that money is going to be spent in a lawsuit.
That's awful.
That could have went to the kids in education who need it.
Weayonnoh, what do you have?
Yeah, so after a long and active legislative session, my kudos is for summer in Rhode Island. It started for me this Wednesday with the first taste of Juneteenth, New England, where there was a lot of food at Farm Fresh and vendors. And then this Saturday, there will be the Juneteenth Festival. So I'm looking forward to the festivals and water fire and all the great things that happen in the summer.
Maybe a little sleeping in?
Oh, yes.
All right, just want to make sure. Patrick, what do you think?
Public records. I think it was on the show maybe a couple of months ago. I said I'm not getting. Don't get your hopes up on public records reform because even though there was another push, as there is every year, to make it easier for the public and the media to get public records, it was never really alive in the General Assembly this year. But it is needed, and I think there will be another effort with maybe a different strategy next year. But the issue around body cameras is just one of them that points to the need to have better public records laws and better access to that information.
Mike, as you know, was the architect of the last major change more than a decade ago, and we have had this discussion. Did they bite off too much in terms of there's so many changes that at the end, if you could suggest to the people who are going to go at it again next year, what would be your suggestion?
I think they need to pick on three big issues, and we put in the balancing test when I was there. That was the issue, and is making sure that police reports, initial arrest reports, were public records as a matter of right. I think they need to just pick it on. I do. Chairman Serper, and I know was a big advocate for this, and because of their oversight role that she has, as well as the senator and
Senator DePalma.
Senator DePalma couldn't. Sorry,
yep.
Senator. So I think they got to look at it more carefully. Unfortunately, the administration was against it. But again, this is an issue that could be ripe for a constitutional convention. They could enshrine these open records laws into the Constitution, which I think would make a big difference. I think Florida does it, puts it in the Constitution.
That's another reason Mike wants the Constitutional Convention, so he maybe can get APRA into it. Okay, folks, that is all the time we have. We appreciate your time. Weayonnoh and Mike and Patrick, good to see you. Hope you guys get some rest over the summer. Folks, if you don't catch us Friday at 7 or Sunday at noon, we archive all of our shows at ripbs.org/lively. Come back here next week. We'll know who is running and who is not, and we'll have a first recap of the first presidential debate. That's coming up next week. Come back and join us as a lively experiment continues.
A Lively Experiment is generously underwritten by.
Hi, I'm John Hazen White Jr. For over 30 years, A Lively Experiment has provided insight and analysis of the political issues that face Rhode Islanders. I'm a proud supporter of this great program and Rhode Island PBS.